And our last panelist, John, would you like to, again, we'll have to keep it relatively short and then we can
Certainly
open up.
I don't share the optimism that my panelists have here today. Land has been at the center of conflict in Zimbabwe for over 120 years. And indisputably, Zimbabwe is an agriculturally based economy, and agriculture uses more land than the other industries. Indisputably, agriculture has been the spine of the Zimbabwe economy up to 2000. I disagree with my colleague on the right who says we weren't the breadbasket of Southern Africa. We indisputably were the breadbasket. We were feeding, especially in inclement climate years, we were feeding a large portion of Southern Africa because of the irrigation infrastructure and water development here in Zimbabwe. What has happened to that industry? And before we go forward with what is being punted today as land reform, one has to look at what happened to what we had. Agriculture was the stabilizing industry in Zimbabwe. It created the food security for that stability. It also was the biggest employer. We're talking here of 30% of the workforce was employed in agriculture. I'll define that further. We're talking about 350,000 permanent employees and 270,000 seasonal casual employees, all resident on farms. With their dependents, we're talking about 2 million people on those farms. We're talking about 4,500 commercial farmers who were Zimbabwean, predominantly. There's food security and employment, and we also talked through the tobacco industry of foreign currency stability. Made this industry a prime target or a political target for what has happened since 2000. One can't go forward without analyzing and dealing with that past. There are legal issues relating to the tenure of this land, the title issues. These issues have been issues of the courts in Zimbabwe, and there have been issues of the regional courts and even the South African jurisdiction in terms of South African nationals who farm in Zimbabwe. And rulings have been made. There have been gross human rights violations on these farms. The contention in civil society is that 80% of the human rights violations have taken place on 20% of the land in Zimbabwe, and that is the commercial farmland. We're talking about 75% of the farm worker population has been displaced. 20% of them again got displaced in Operation Maramba Sfina. If this had been about land reform, surely those farm workers would have been included as beneficiaries in this. They have been specifically excluded. The skills are still there. The title has been disengaged. The collateral value, some would say, is destroyed. I don't believe that. We, in Zimbabwe, have a lot of the ingredients for going forward. We have human resources. We've heard about them today. Certainly in agriculture, we have got those skills vested in the citizens, commercial farmers. We've got them vested in the farm workers. The issue of title and the ability to raise the capital, the collateral value, has to be reinstated of this land, regardless whoever is on that land. That land cannot go forward without the ability to raise the capital. We have an historical injustice that has been carried over from colonial times with regard to a lack of tenure in the communal areas. This needs to be addressed to allow the communal area farmers, the smallholder farmers, to raise the necessary capital. The point I'm making here, there is no going forward without addressing the inadequacies of the past and the injustices that have occurred in the last 10 years. The ingredients are there for one to be very positive. But to be positive today without addressing those, will be a huge mistake. The situation as it is at the moment is land reform in Zimbabwe is stillborn. It needs to be revamped, relooked at, and taken forward legally, legitimately in the law, all right, and empowering the people of Zimbabwe. The people we're talking about who are the beneficiaries of the land, and that's excludes the farm workers, have been given nothing. They've been given a millstone around their necks. Until they are given ownership of that land, and the freedom and empowerment of that ownership, and the ability to raise the capital required, all right, only then will we move forward. And move forward with addressing the historical issues of who was there before, all right, and what their requirements are in terms of either restituting them and putting them back on farms, I'm referring now to the farm workers and the commercial farmers, or compensating them for what has happened.
I thought that really we are focusing on moving forward, okay? Some of the issues that you talk about, the compensation and so forth, they have to be dealt with, okay, properly. And, you know, you've got the large farmers have their view, government has its view, citizens have their view as to what is being compensated, the value of it, and how to do it and so on. So that has to be dealt with. And I think that it can be dealt with in parallel to an agrarian reform and economic recovery program. These things are not necessarily tied to, although it would help.
And who should pay for who should provide the funds for the compensation?
Well, I was hoping that we don't get sidetracked into the compensation issue, but well, I personally do believe that we need to get some funds from the former colonial master. Okay, to be honest with you, unless we have a major, a credible mechanism of discounting an independently arrived at valuation of the farms in question. Okay. But this is what I'm talking about, needs negotiation and discussions in a much broader sense. And it did not detract us from thinking about how to recover the economy and agriculture. Okay? That's the point. And secondly, the tenure issue, the point that the discussion of the Zimbabwe tenure is almost fundamentalist. As in, you cannot have a recovery unless you have a freehold private land market of private tenure, without due consideration of the social political effects of reintroducing that kind of tenure within the communal areas and in the newly resettled areas. And we have experiences in Kenya, Ivory Coast, and so forth, where this kind of experimentation has had problems. So I think we should go slow on that, and we should think about the tenure, improving upon the tenure that is being provided just now, the leasehold system, which can be made collaterable, and regulate the reconcentration of land. Okay?
Okay.
And I think, you know, so we deal with the past, but we need to deal with it in a forum which does not become an obstacle to going forward for the majority of the population.
The question of compensation and tenure security is neither here nor there. It's an important part. And I would assume that the constitutional process would make some pronouncement, but there would be need for a specific land summit or land commission that answers the rationalization process of the tenure issue and also pronounces and looks into the agrarian policy and question, because I don't think it is correct to assume that everyone who is holding land is looking at it as an economic asset and therefore would want to go to the bank and get a loan to produce on it. So we need to look at the different needs for land, and the policy should be reactive to those things. And my other reaction would be to Moyo, the question of appropriate technology. Mr. Moyo, the GMO, again, has not been an answer in many areas, if I'm preempting you, in terms of food security and food sovereignty. What it has done, it has undermined where lessons from India, South Africa, and other places have already shown that it is undermining the capacity of smaller farmers to have the sovereignty, the ability to control the seed, circulate it amongst themselves, and therefore maintain that independence and ability to feed themselves. So for me, those are very important. In terms of who should compensate and pay for land, Lancaster House files have just come out in London, open for no one has proper studies as to text of that agreement have not yet been done. But what can be seen from the people who have made references to that. I've written a chapter on that, is that compensation still has to be fully coming from the 120 years of land grabs and land theft and land distortions that have taken place, has not been fully compensated. And there is need to understand that and make that responsibility shared by both regimes, the colonial and the current regime.
Okay, thank you. Kalman, I imagine one country you could point to for GM as a success would be Brazil, which has done rather well with boosting its food security and in using the technologies you talk about. But I'm sure you can talk for yourself.
Yeah, I think for me, it's not only about biotech. It is just a question of saying, do we need to increase the quantity of our harvests? And if we need to increase the quantity of harvests, what is available? What levers are available for us to pull to do that? It is not about being stuck in one mode that has been practiced in past centuries. It is about moving on with newer technologies. And it's not only about GMO. We need to be sure that we give our farmers products that will drive yield through more efficient use of water, through nutrients, through soils, better use of soils and limited land areas, and through better tolerance to herbicides and better resistance to pests. That is not about GMO. It is just about enabling our farmers to have access to lower cost technologies that give them higher yield. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get drowned in the debate on GMO and forget that GMO is just one aspect, and when we that's not really the debate. It's really about just the technologies.
Okay, thank you. John, a quick response, and then we'll open up to the floor, and then you'll get another chance to come back.
I'd like to pick up on the compensation restitution issues. The people we're talking about here who were on the commercial farmland in the past are citizens of Zimbabwe, be they black or be they white. These are citizens' rights. The right to the ownership of property is a basic human right. It's as simple as that. And these rights have been fought for. They've been fought for in the Zimbabwe jurisdiction. We've been deprived of access to the courts there. They've been taken into the SADC, the regional court, the tribunal, and they've been fought for in the South African jurisdiction. And the establishment, because of what has happened in Zimbabwe, is unprecedented anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in Africa, in terms of the gross human rights violations. The courts need to establish what constitutes fair compensation. This will go a long way to freeing up that land. Until such time as these issues are dealt with, farmers will retain those title deeds. And farmers have the ability, if not in Zimbabwe, they have the ability to sue in the international arena for infringement of those rights. So this is a warning to anyone who is illegally on that land. The fact that farmers have not been compensated and farm workers haven't been compensated nullifies this as appropriation of land under the Land Acquisition Act. So it's null and void in terms of that. I'd like to pick up in terms of the inputs, the debate with regard to GMO seeds, technology. Right? None of this is going to really go forward until such time as those individual farmers have the ability, the collateral value of their land, the ability to raise the capital. And it goes beyond just purchase of inputs. It's a matter of education and training of people on that land. The difference, and one must understand this, we have a 100-year-old model of the two systems: communal area, smallholder production, and commercial farmland. One, a huge success story, although Sam would disagree with me, and the other has been hamstrung, right, from a lack of development and a lack of ability to raise the capital. And in fact, it goes beyond that, because we're looking at locked up capital on that land. Any investment that has taken place there is locked up. So we need to make sure that the skills and the ability to raise the inputs are dealt with. And a lot of that comes from the tenure issues.